The letter from home. The day had barely begun when Sundar Pichai sat quietly by the window of his office on the top floor of Google's headquarters. It was early, just after dawn, and the California sun hadn't yet melted the thin morning mist, resting gently over the city. The office was silent but not empty. Inside there were shadows of deadlines, quiet hums of distant emails arriving, and the ever-present expectation of brilliance that followed him wherever he went. He wore a plain gray sweater and glasses, slightly askew on his nose. The same kind he had worn back in Chennai when he was just a curious boy fiddling with circuits in a tiny apartment. The room was filled with polished wood, glass walls, and sleek technology. But despite the elegance, Sundar felt something hollow that morning. He had built empires with code, led revolutions in tech, and spoken on the world's most powerful stages. Yet, something tugged at his chest, small and persistent, like a child, pulling at a sleeve. That's when he noticed the envelope. It was thin and brown, sitting quietly among colorful invitation cards, reports, and sleek black folders. No one knew how it got there. It was handwritten in careful Tamil script. Immediately, his heart skipped. He knew that writing. It was his grandmother's. He hadn't heard from her in months. She lived in a small village outside Chennai, the same place where Sundar was born. Her name was Meenakshi, a quiet woman with silver hair that danced in the wind and a laugh that made neighbors smile from across the street. She had raised him more than anyone else. When his parents worked late hours and struggled to pay school fees, Meenakshi was the one who packed his lunches, told him stories under the stars, and saved coins in an old jar so he could one day have a bicycle. He opened the letter with trembling hands. "My dear Sundar," it began, and already his eyes stung. "You must be very busy," she wrote. "But I need to ask you something important. It's about our village. People are suffering, and I am scared. I know you have become a big man now, but I remember when you were small and always helped the kittens when they cried. You always had that kindness in your eyes." Sundar read each word slowly, almost hearing her voice. Meenakshi wrote about strange things happening in the village, about farmers losing their land without warning, about a new company building strange towers near the water tanks, and about the air growing heavier, making it hard for old people to breathe. She said people were afraid to speak. The village leaders had disappeared one by one, first the school principal, then the postman, then even the doctor. Everyone said it was just change. But Meenakshi didn't believe that. "This is not our village anymore," she wrote. "I don't know what is happening. I don't know who to ask, so I'm asking you." He folded the letter slowly and sat back in his chair. The hum of the office air conditioning filled the silence. He looked out at the city again, but it felt smaller now, less real. He closed his laptop and leaned forward, resting his head in his hands. Something inside him began to shift. He had solved some of the world's most complex problems. But this was different. It wasn't about algorithms or shareholders. It was about home, about where he came from, about a woman who had nothing but love to offer, and who now, for the first time, had asked him for help. But there was more. Taped inside the letter was a blurry photo, folded neatly. It showed a tall, concrete structure, gray and cold, towering over green fields. Beside it stood men in black uniforms with no names or badges. One of them, in the corner of the photo, looked directly at the camera. His face was half-shadowed. His eyes were not kind. Sundar stared at that photo for a long time. He knew he couldn't ignore this. Not just because it was his grandmother, not just because it was his village, but because something about it felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't just construction or pollution. It felt planned, too clean, too silent, too dangerous. He took a deep breath, stood up, and walked to the large map on the wall, one that showed internet coverage around the world. His fingers hovered over India, then zoomed in closer and closer until he could almost see the small roads leading into his old neighborhood. He hadn't been back in 10 years. He picked up his phone and called his assistant. "Clear my schedule for the next week," he said quietly. "Everything?" she asked, surprised. "Yes. he said. Everything. May I ask why? There was a long pause. Sundar looked again at the photo, then at the letter, then out, the window toward the horizon where the sun had finally begun to rise. I think something's wrong, he whispered. And if I don't go now, it might be too late. What Sundar didn't know, what he couldn't yet see, was that the village wasn't just asking for help. It was warning him. And by the time he arrived, the danger would already be waiting. Return to the roots. The heat hit Sundar the moment. He stepped off the plane. It wasn't the soft warmth of California mornings, but the thick, living heat of Chennai, full of dust, scent, memory, and something heavier he couldn't name. It clung to his skin like a forgotten childhood, tugging him back into a world he thought he had outgrown but which had never really left him. Outside the airport, the city pulsed with chaos. Auto rickshaws weaved through honking cars, men balanced, towering sacks on bicycles, and the scent of fried snacks mixed with petrol and jasmine in the air. Everything moved fast and loud, yet underneath the surface Sundar sensed something else. A stillness, a quiet watchfulness. His driver, a kind-eyed man named Murugan, stood holding a small cardboard sign with Sundar's name scrawled in rushed Tamil. Murugan gave a respectful nod but didn't ask questions. Sundar appreciated that. The car ride out of the city was long and winding. Buildings gave way to smaller homes, then to green fields dotted with palm trees and grazing cows. Birds swooped low and women walked along the road carrying pots on their heads. The rhythm of the land was slow and soft, but Sundar noticed it again, the stillness. Too many eyes watching from shaded doorways. Too many conversations stopping as they passed. How's the village these days? Sundar finally asked, trying to sound casual. Murugan hesitated. His eyes stayed on the road. Quiet, sir, he said. Too quiet, maybe. Sundar didn't press further, but his stomach tightened. When they reached the village, the sun was dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows across the dusty path. It looked just like he remembered. The narrow lanes, the brick houses, the open courtyards with Rangoli designs drawn in chalk. And yet, it felt different. The colors were faded. The air felt dense. The children didn't run and laugh as they once had. Instead, they stood silently by the corners, staring. Meenakshi's house was at the edge of the village near the old banyan tree. Sundar stepped out of the car and walked the final few meters alone. He had imagined this moment many times, but now that it was real, he didn't know what to say. The wooden door creaked open before he knocked. She stood there, small and fragile, her silver hair tied in a neat braid. Her face was more lined than he remembered, but her eyes, the same deep brown eyes that had once smiled at him in candlelight while telling stories of gods and lost kings, were still sharp. You came, she said softly, as if unsure whether it was a dream. I had to, Sundar replied, and suddenly his throat tightened. She reached out and touched his face, her hands trembling. You look tired. So do you, he said, and they both smiled. Inside, her house was just as it had always been, clean but humble, with a small altar in the corner, faded photographs on the wall, and the smell of turmeric and incense hanging gently in the air. He sat on the floor like he had as a boy while she brought him a steel tumbler filled with cool buttermilk. They didn't talk about the letter right away. They spoke of old neighbors, of his mother's health, of the jasmine plant that still bloomed near the well. But eventually the silence came, the kind that waits to be broken by truth. Tell me everything, Sundar said finally. Meenakshi sighed. They came 6 months ago, people from a company, not from here. They said they were building a new technology hub, a research center for clean energy. They offered money to the farmers. Some accepted, most didn't. But the ones who said no, strange things started happening. Sundar leaned in, listening closely. Livestock disappeared. Wells dried up. One man found his crops burned in the night. Then people began to leave. Not by choice, Sundar. They left because they were scared. Or because they were made to leave. Some houses were taken by force. No police ever came. And those who tried to complain, they vanished too. Who's behind it? Sundar asked. Meenakshi shook her head. I don't know. But I've seen the trucks. No logos. Just black windows. And men who don't speak. They don't look like workers. They look like guards. Like soldiers. Sundar felt a cold chill run through him. Did they threaten you? Not yet, she whispered. But last week someone followed me home. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to cause panic. But I couldn't keep quiet anymore. That's why I wrote to you. Just then there was a knock at the door. 3 slow knocks. Meenakshi's face paled. She didn't move. Who would come at this hour? Sundar asked. Don't open it, she said quickly. Please. The knocks came again. Louder. More urgent. Sundar rose slowly and stepped toward the door. But before he could reach it, a voice called out from outside. Amma, it's me. Padma. Meenakshi exhaled. Relief spread across her face. Sundar opened the door and a young woman stepped in, breathing hard. Her long braid was messy, her sari covered in dust. She looked like she had run all the way from the other side of the village. They took my father, she said. They came during the night. No warning, no words, they dragged him out. I hid in the storeroom. No one is doing anything. Everyone's afraid. Meenakshi pulled her close. Sundar stood frozen. Who was your father? He asked gently. Ramalingam, she said. He was the school teacher. Meenakshi looked at Sundar with trembling eyes. He was the one who spoke out first, she whispered. He tried to organize a meeting. He told us not to sell our land. He said the water was changing. Padma nodded. He said it's not just a tech hub. Something else is going on. There. Something secret. Sundar clenched his fists. The quiet village he remembered was hiding a storm, and he had just stepped into the middle of it. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves of the banyan tree. From somewhere far away, a dog barked once, then went silent. Something was watching, and something was waiting. Beneath the banyan tree, the next, morning began long before sunrise. The air was still, heavy with a silence that felt unnatural, as if the entire village had agreed to hold its breath. Sundar sat on the front steps of Meenakshi's home, sipping tea from a small clay cup, its steam curling softly into the fading night. Around him, the village slowly stirred, but without sound. No rooster crowed, no bicycles creaked, no children laughed. It was a strange kind of waking, one filled with dread instead of light. He had barely slept. His mind kept circling the same questions. What kind of company sends men in unmarked trucks? Why silence the village schoolteacher? Why now? He thought about Padma's frightened eyes and the pain in Meenakshi's voice when she whispered, "This is not our village anymore." Something told him this was bigger than just land or development. Something was being hidden. Something dark. After a quick meal of idli and coconut chutney, Sundar made a decision. He would go see the site himself, not with guards, not with government permission. Quietly. Like the boy who once wandered rice fields with a radio taken apart in his pocket. Murugan arrived right on time, his rickshaw rattling gently into the yard. Sundar slipped into the back and whispered the location Padma had described. The old farmland near the dried-out tank, past the eucalyptus grove. Murugan's face tightened when he heard it. "Are you sure, sir?" he asked, eyes avoiding Sundar's. "Yes," Sundar said. "Don't tell anyone we're going." The road was narrow and broken, winding through stretches of parched earth and thorny bushes. Once these lands were lush and green. Now they looked tired, forgotten. As they passed, Sundar noticed something else. No birds. Not one. After half an hour, Murugan slowed down and pointed. "You'll have to walk from here. They built a fence around the place." Sundar nodded. He stepped out, thanked Murugan quietly, and began walking. Dust kicked up around his shoes. Every step felt heavier than the last. The fence appeared suddenly, a tall, rust-colored wall of metal topped with curling barbed wire. Beyond it, he could see parts of the new research facility. The structure was massive, made of dull concrete and dark glass. It didn't look like anything related to clean energy. No solar panels, no wind turbines, just cold, sealed buildings, and long pipes disappearing underground. He crouched low, moving along the fence until he found a gap where the wire had been twisted upward, just wide enough to crawl through. He hesitated for a moment, then slipped inside. The air inside the compound felt different, thicker, and it smelled faintly metallic, like old batteries and rain on steel. He stayed low, moving between large metal containers and strange vehicles, without logos. He couldn't see any people, but he could feel something, an invisible tension like being watched through glass. Finally, he reached a raised platform near one of the buildings. From here, he could see the entrance to a large, underground tunnel. It was partially hidden behind a false wall, but the wind had blown part of the covering away. Curious, Sundar moved closer, and that's when he heard the sound. Faint at first, then clearer. It was a low hum, mechanical, constant, like a giant engine buried beneath the earth. But beneath the hum, something else. A clicking sound. Rhythmic, unnatural. He raised his phone to take a photo, but as he did, a sharp voice rang out from behind him. "Drop the phone." He froze. "Turn around." Slowly. Sundar obeyed, heart pounding. A man stood there dressed in black from head to toe. No name tag, no emblem, just a cold, flat stare. Behind him, two others appeared holding strange devices, neither guns nor tools. Something else entirely. "Who are you?" the first man asked. "My name is Sundar," he replied calmly. "I'm from this village. This area is restricted. I was told it was a research facility." The man didn't blink. "Leave now, and forget what you saw." Sundar looked at him closely. "What are you doing here?" "This land belongs to the farmers." The man stepped forward. Too close. "Not anymore." And then he said something that chilled Sundar more than the threat itself. "You're not the first to come asking questions, but you might be the last." Sundar stared at him. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm informing you. Turn around. Go back to your village. Stay there." He had no choice. Not now. Not alone. He backed away, then walked slowly toward the fence, the man's eyes following him the entire time. Sundar didn't run. He didn't speak. But inside, something had begun to burn. By the time he returned to Meenakshi's home, the sky was dark. Padma was waiting, her hands shaking. "I found something," she said quickly, pulling him inside. "In my father's cupboard. It was hidden in a jar of rice. He must have known they would come." She handed him a notebook. Old, stained, and filled with tiny, rushed handwriting. Sundar opened it slowly. The first page was a list of names, villagers who had spoken out. Beside each name was a date, and a word, disappeared. On the last page, there was only one line, underlined in red. "It's not just about land. It's the water. They're doing something to the water. And they know I know." Sundar looked up, his mind spinning. "They're poisoning the land," he whispered, "or extracting something from it, something dangerous." Padma nodded. "My father said the water changed color before the fish died, and that birds stopped nesting near the tank. He said the village is sitting on something they want." Meenakshi stepped into the room, her face pale. "You must leave now," she said. "They'll come for you. They always do." Sundar shook his head. "No, not this time. I'm not running." Padma looked terrified. "Then what will you do?" He stared at the notebook in his hands, the names of the disappeared burning into his mind. "I'll find the truth," he said softly. "But I won't do it alone." Outside, in the darkness, a car passed slowly down the road. Its headlights were off. Echoes in the well. The night was thick and unforgiving. Even after the car passed, Sundar, Padma, and Meenakshi sat frozen in silence, their ears tuned to the smallest sound. A footstep, a knock, the low growl of an engine returning. But nothing came. Just the endless chorus of insects, now louder than usual. as if the earth itself was warning them. Sundar barely slept. He sat on the floor with the notebook in his lap, its pages fragile but screaming with meaning. Every name, every detail, every whispered note was a piece of a puzzle too large for one man to solve alone. But still, he traced each line with his fingers, searching for anything that could help him understand what was being hidden beneath the surface of his village. At dawn, the world remained heavy and slow. Meenakshi quietly prepared tea, her movements slower than usual. Padma stared out the window, one hand gripping the edge of the frame like it could hold back the future. "There's one place left," Sundar said suddenly. "The old well behind, the temple. My father used to say it was the deepest point in the village. If something's wrong with the water, it would start there." Meenakshi looked at him sharply. "No one goes there anymore." "Why?" "Because the last man who tried to test it, he didn't come back." A silence settled between them. But Sundar stood up anyway. "Then I have to go." The path to the old temple was overgrown and cracked, as if the land itself had tried to forget. Vines curled over fallen stones and thick patches of wild grass reached knee-high. Sundar walked carefully, Padma following close behind. She hadn't wanted him to go alone. As they approached, the temple rose like a memory from the mist. Small, whitewashed with faded carvings along the walls. It was empty, abandoned long ago. Behind it, half hidden under wild branches, was the well. It was wide and round, lined with smooth black stone, and covered by a rusted iron grate that had been bent on one side. Sundar peered inside. Darkness met his gaze, the kind of deep, endless dark that didn't belong to this world. He dropped a stone. 1 second, 2, 3. Then came the splash. But it wasn't the sound of water that chilled him. It was the echo. It came back. Wrong. Distorted. Like the splash had passed through something unnatural on its way down. "Hold this," he said, handing Padma his phone. He pulled out a small device from his bag. A portable water sampler, the kind used by environmental researchers. He had grabbed it before leaving California, almost as an afterthought. He tied it to a long rope and lowered it into the well. The rope jerked slightly as it hit the water, but then hung still. He waited, heart pounding. Finally, he pulled it back up. The vial was half full. The liquid inside looked like water, clear, ordinary, but as Sundar held it up to the light, a faint shimmer passed through it like oil on glass, and it smelled wrong, a chemical sharpness that didn't belong in groundwater. "We need to test this," he said, "but not here." They returned to the house in silence. Sundar used a small digital microscope from his bag to examine the sample. What he saw made his stomach drop. Microscopic threads. Synthetic. Moving. They were alive. He quickly ran a scan on his laptop, comparing the particles to known compounds in his database. The screen blinked, then froze. A red warning appeared. Unknown. Synthetic material. Possible nanoagent. Bioreactive. Handle with caution. Padma leaned over his shoulder. "What does that mean?" "It's not just pollution," he whispered. "This is technology, something artificial, designed to behave like a living thing. It's inside the water, maybe even the soil. If it spreads, it could contaminate everything." "So, that's what they're hiding," Padma said, her voice shaking. "Not just hiding," Sundar said. "They're testing." Just then, his laptop screen flickered. For a moment it went black. Then white text appeared. "You shouldn't have come back." He stared at it, stunned. A second later, the message vanished. Padma backed away, her face pale. "How did they? They've tapped the local network." "Maybe. Even the power lines," he said. "They know I'm here, they're watching." Meenakshi entered the room, her hands trembling. "I heard something outside," she whispered. Sundar ran to the window. A black car sat at the far end of the road. No one got out. No one moved. It was just there. "We can't stay," Padma said. "No," Sundar replied. "We can't hide." He turned to his laptop. If they were watching him, he would let them. But on his terms, He opened an encrypted connection, routed through 3 satellite relays, and began typing. Not a message to the authorities. Not yet. He knew better than to trust politics. Instead, he contacted someone he hadn't spoken to in years, an old friend from his early engineering days, a whistleblower, someone who owed him a favor. The message was short: send a drone. Silent. Thermal scan. Coordinates attached, and bring backup. Quietly, he hit send. Then he turned to Padma. Help me pack. We're going back to the site. Are you crazy? They think they can scare us. We're not going there to fight. We're going there to record. She hesitated, then nodded. As they stepped outside, the wind picked up. The trees swayed violently, even though the sky remained clear. The black car was gone. But on the ground near the gate something had been left behind, a small white envelope. Sundar picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, no words, just a printed photo of Padma. And beneath it, a line of red ink. She talks. She disappears. He looked at Padma, then at the horizon. This was no longer about secrets. This was a war. The silent footage, the village roads were darker than usual as Sundar and Padma moved quickly, keeping close to the walls, avoiding the moonlight. Above them, the sky was open and starless, as if the heavens themselves had turned away. Every step they took felt too loud, every dog's bark in the distance too sharp. There was no turning back now. The threat in the envelope had changed everything. It was no longer just about finding answers. It was about survival. Padma clutched a backpack close to her chest. Inside it were essentials: the water sample, the notebook, Sundar's portable scanner, and a hidden memory card with encrypted files Sundar had managed to copy from the contaminated water scan. Those files might be the only proof they had, and they couldn't risk keeping them in one place. Are you sure this is the right way? Padma whispered as they reached the edge of the forest. Yes, Sundar said. We'll go through the trees. The compound is just beyond the clearing. The drone will scan from above. All we need is 20 minutes. But they only had 10. The moment they reached the cover of trees, Sundar's phone vibrated. A single message appeared on the dark screen. Drone deployed. 5 minutes to scan. No detection. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and nodded at Padma. They crouched low and moved carefully, the forest floor crunching beneath them. Somewhere, behind the thick trees, was the facility, the strange, silent structure that had replaced farmland, silenced villagers, and poisoned the water. Sundar's hand shook as he lifted a small receiver from his bag. It looked simple, but it was powerful. It would capture footage, heat signatures, and signal emissions from within the compound. As they approached the clearing, Sundar spotted the same platform he had seen before, the one near the hidden tunnel. But this time, something was different. The air buzzed faintly, a new vibration, a new energy. They stayed in the shadow of the trees and waited. Above them, the soft whir of the drone passed overhead. It was almost invisible against the night sky. Sundar watched his screen as it streamed thermal data in real time. Buildings glowed softly with internal heat. One in particular pulsed with an odd rhythm, like it had a heartbeat. That's the one, Sundar whispered. Something's alive in there. Padma stared at the screen. Alive? Not a person, he said. Some kind of system. Something reacting to temperature changes. It's not just a lab. It's a lab built around a reactor. Or worse. On the drone feed, they saw movement. Figures walking in formation, carrying large crates toward the tunnel. No lights, no conversation, just silence and precision. Sundar tapped the screen to record. Suddenly, a flashing signal popped up. Unknown signal detected. Jamming incoming. They found the drone, he muttered. We have to move. They ducked low and turned back toward the path they came from. But just as they reached the edge of the trees, Sundar froze. Ahead of them, the way was blocked. A tall man stood there, holding a long metallic device in his hand. Not a weapon. A scanner. Behind him, 2 others appeared. Silent and dressed, in black like shadows come to life. Padma grabbed Sundar's arm. Run, she whispered, but Sundar didn't move. The man stepped forward. He didn't speak. He simply raised the device and pressed a button. A red light passed over them in a horizontal line, scanning from head to toe. Then, a strange thing happened. The device beeped once, and the man stopped. He looked directly at Sundar, tilting his head slightly, not in confusion, not in curiosity, in recognition. Then he lowered the scanner and whispered something into a hidden mic behind his collar. A soft voice replied, "Stand down." And just like that, the men turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Padma was shaking. Why did they let us go? Sundar didn't answer, not because he didn't want to, because he didn't know. Back in the house, Sundar locked the door and windows. Padma paced the room, unable to sit still. They reviewed the drone footage together, slowing down the thermal scan frame by frame. At one point near the tunnel entrance, the camera caught something strange. It looked like a figure, but not a person. Tall, motionless, glowing bright on the thermal scale, but completely still. Around it, even the heat of the guards faded. "What is that?" Padma asked. Sundar zoomed in. "It's not human," he said. "It's shielding something. Or it is the thing they're shielding." Beneath the footage, encrypted data began to decode. The drone had picked up wireless signal leaks, weak, buried behind layers of noise. Sundar decrypted the first part. Project Sthira Phase 3. Rural field testing initiated. Subject transfer successful. Containment integrity 87%. Public contact risk minimal. Proceed with next stage. Padma leaned closer. "What's Project Sthira?" Sundar read the words again, his hands gripping the edge of the desk. "Sthira means stable," he said. "But this isn't about peace, it's about control. They're using the village as a testing ground, not just for tech, for behavior, for silence." He tapped on another data line. Phase 4 location, Arani. His breath caught. Arani was a nearby town, bigger, with more people. A school, a hospital, a railway station. "They're going to expand it," Sundar said. "This isn't the final site. It's just the beginning." Padma sat down heavily. "What do we do now?" He looked at her. "We tell the world." The next morning, Sundar used a hidden satellite connection to send the footage and data to 5 independent journalists and a trusted scientist in Bangalore. He encrypted the files, timed the upload, and included a failsafe. If he or Padma didn't log in again within 72 hours, the files would auto-publish everywhere. News outlets, research journals, social media. As the final file uploaded, a new message flashed on the screen. "I warned you, now you've invited them." Padma stared. "Who sent that?" Before Sundar could answer, a loud noise shattered the morning stillness. A car screeched to a stop outside the house. Not one car. 3. Black. Silent. From inside, figures stepped out. Not the quiet watchers from before. These men were armed. Sundar grabbed the notebook, the drive in Padma's hand. "We need to move, now." Meenakshi stepped into the hallway, her voice shaking. "Go through the kitchen door. There's a path behind the neem trees. It leads to the old rice mill. Hide there." Sundar hugged her tightly. "I'll come back for you. Just stay." "Alive," she whispered. As they slipped into the shadows, the front door burst open, and behind them, the village finally woke up, not with peace, but with fear. The war had begun. The voice that broke the silence. The air behind the neem trees was thick with dust and dread. Sundar and Padma ran without speaking, their steps swallowed by the dry earth, their breath sharp with panic. Behind them, the men in black fanned out. Across the village, boots striking hard against soft ground. Doors were kicked open. Voices barked orders. The village, once silent in fear, now trembled in open terror. They reached the old rice mill just as the sun began to rise, painting the sky with soft golds that felt cruel in their beauty. The building had long been abandoned. Walls crumbling, machinery rusted, and vines curling through the broken windows. But for now it was safety. At least it felt that way. Inside, they found a corner hidden by sacks of old grain and covered themselves with torn sheets. Padma's hands were cold. Sundar tried to steady his breathing, but his thoughts were racing. Outside, the world was falling apart. But somewhere, across the invisible lines of data and code, their message was traveling. His drone footage, the contaminated water, the thermal scans, the list of names, the plan for Irani, the truth. If the system worked the way he'd designed it, the files would start appearing in inboxes within the hour. Small at first, then viral. "Do you think anyone will believe us?" Padma asked, her voice nearly lost, in the silence. "They won't have a choice," Sundar said. "Not once they see the footage. Not once they test the water themselves." But a shadow of doubt lingered in his mind. He had seen what power could do, how it could erase facts, twist narratives, bury entire villages beneath polished lies. And this wasn't just about a corporation or a secret project. This was about control, about choosing who gets to speak and who disappears into the ground without a trace. He opened his laptop again. The battery was low, maybe 1 hour left, but the signal was still active. Then, a ping. One of the journalists had responded. "We received the files. We're reviewing them now. This is explosive. Are you safe?" He typed quickly. "No, we're in hiding. Tell the world. Don't wait." A second message came in. Then a third. By the fourth, he stopped reading. The storm was coming, and for once, he wasn't alone. By late afternoon, the first headlines appeared. Mysterious facility in Tamil Nadu village linked to experimental tech. Google CEO's secret trip uncovers hidden water contamination in native village exclusive. Leaked footage shows villagers disappearing near government-backed tech site. More messages poured in. A scientist confirmed the presence of unknown synthetic bioagents in the water sample. Another publication uploaded the thermal drone scans. Someone found the company's name buried in shell records, a front with no physical office, connected to multiple classified contracts and shadow investors. The story was spreading like wildfire, and that was when everything changed. The silence was broken by the sound of distant shouting. But it wasn't angry. It wasn't the bark of fear. It was rising. Voices, many of them, echoed through the village lanes, louder and louder, until they reached the mill. Sundar peeked through a crack in the wall, and he saw them. Villagers. Dozens of them. No longer hiding. Men, women, even children. Some holding signs, others holding nothing but their voices. They marched down the path with a strength that felt older than fear itself. At the front, holding a photo of her father, was Padma's younger sister. Meenakshi walked beside her, proud and unshaken. Padma gasped. "They came." Sundar nodded. "They're not afraid anymore." And then came the real twist. The black cars returned, but this time they didn't park quietly. They didn't move like ghosts. They screeched to a halt, and one by one, the men in black stepped out. Only this time they didn't hold weapons. They held nothing at all. One of them, tall with the same scanner from before, raised his hand. "Stand back," shouted one of the villagers. But the man said nothing. He simply turned and walked toward the truck, then opened the back. Inside were boxes, not weapons, documents, files, drives, maps. "What is this?" Padma whispered. Sundar stepped outside. Slowly as the village watched, the man looked at him, then gave the smallest nod. "They left us behind," he said quietly. "The project was never supposed to be exposed, but it's out now, and we're not staying to clean it up." He dropped a black case at Sundar's feet. "Everything is inside," the man said. "You know what to do with it." And then, just like that, the men got into their vehicles and disappeared down the road, leaving behind the files, the facility, and the truth. The government arrived 3 days later, too late to hide what had already spread. Journalists had already filmed the tunnel, tested the water, and spoken to families whose loved ones had vanished. Under pressure, the local officials denied involvement, then promised an investigation, then silence again. But it didn't matter. The world had seen. Weeks passed. Padma was offered a scholarship to study environmental law in Delhi. She took it. Meenakshi's house became a meeting point for community leaders from nearby villages, learning how to protect their land, test their water, and speak up without fear. The rice mill was cleaned and turned into a school. And Sundar, he went back to California. But something in him had changed. He no longer felt at home in polished offices or in quiet boardrooms. He remembered the names in that notebook. The missing, teacher, the dry wells, the voices that had once been silenced. He began working on something new, not a product, not a feature, a system, a network of independent sensors and anonymous upload portals for rural communities to report environmental dangers in real time. No middlemen, no approvals, just truth. He called it Sthira, not because it meant stability, but because after all the silence, all the loss and all the fear, they had finally found their voice, and now it could never be taken away again.